The call I'd been waiting 24 years for came on a Tuesday. From my corner office at Sterling Oak Advisory, I watched the Scottsdale sun bake the asphalt below. The caller ID flashed a name I'd buried long ago, Uncle Rick, the man who'd traded my future for a cherry-red Corvette. I let it ring, the sound an unwelcome ghost in my meticulously ordered world. Finally, I answered, keeping my voice level. "Hello?" His was a panicked whisper. "Ethan? Kid, it's me. I'm in serious trouble. I need a loan." A slow, cold smile touched my lips as I stared out at my empire. The game was finally beginning. "Uncle Rick," I said, my voice smooth as ice. "Tell me everything." As he stammered on about bad business deals and crippling debt, I pictured him not as the broken man on the phone, but as the flashy charmer who'd been the life of every family party. Uncle Rick. Always ready with a slick joke and an empty promise. He could talk anyone into anything. I was 18 when he talked my parents into letting him invest my college fund. 2 weeks later, he rolled up in a gleaming Corvette, the Arizona sun glinting off the hood. He tossed me the keys for a moment. "See, kid? You gotta live a little," he'd laughed, before speeding off, leaving me standing in the driveway with a Stanford acceptance letter that was now just a piece of paper. That betrayal became the fuel. While he was burning through my future on weekend trips to Vegas, I was working 2 jobs, taking night classes, and clawing my way up. Every stock I picked, every deal I closed, was a silent monument to his treachery. His pathetic plea for $50,000 finally ended. "Just to get me back on my feet, Ethan, please." I let the silence hang for a moment, a predator enjoying the stillness before the strike. "Of course, Uncle Rick," I said, my voice dripping with false empathy. "But this is a delicate matter. You need to fly out to Scottsdale. We'll discuss this face to face." I hung up before he could respond. He would be on the next flight. He'd be desperate. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was the polar opposite of his son, Rick. Where Rick was all flash and empty charisma, my grandfather was granite and quiet integrity. He'd built a regional construction empire with his bare hands and a sharp mind. He saw Rick for exactly what he was, a charming parasite, always looking for the easy angle. He'd watched with a heavy heart as my own parents, blinded by brotherly affection, fell for Rick's schemes time and time again. When my college fund vanished, my father made excuses. "He's just in a tight spot, Ethan. He'll pay it back." My mother just wept. But my grandfather, he said nothing. He simply looked at me, his eyes filled with a disappointment so profound it was terrifying. It wasn't directed at me, but at the weakness he saw in his own bloodline. A week later, he sat me down in his study, the room smelling of old leather and discipline. "A man who builds nothing on his own will eventually tear down everything around him," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "Remember that, boy." He never mentioned the money again. He passed away 2 years later. Rick gave a tearful, eloquent eulogy about a father he barely knew, then worked the room, shaking hands and trying to get a feel for the inheritance. He assumed, like everyone, that the estate would be split. But a week after the funeral, I was summoned to the office of Arthur's estate lawyer, a man as old and serious as the mahogany desk he sat behind. He slid a thick vellum envelope across the polished surface. "Arthur established this private trust for you 5 years ago," he explained, his voice dry. "The day after your uncle took your college fund, to be precise. He made the initial deposit and amended his will to make the trust the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. His instructions were clear. You were not to be told until his death." My hands trembled as I opened it. The numbers swam before my eyes. It wasn't just a fortune. It was a kingdom. Millions. The properties, the stock portfolio, everything. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your grandfather believed character was the only true currency," he said softly. "He considered the stolen $80,000 a cheap price to pay to reveal your uncle's and to forge yours." I walked out of that office a different person. The rage that had been a wildfire in my gut cooled into a block of solid ice. Revenge was no longer about getting even. It was about fulfilling my grandfather's final silent instruction. Rick hadn't just stolen my college fund. He had unknowingly nominated me as the sole heir to the Vance legacy. He'd handed me the sword, and for 22 years I had been sharpening it. Now he was flying right toward its edge. Rick arrived looking exactly as I'd pictured. A day-old shirt, a sheen of flop sweat on his brow, and the desperate, hungry eyes of a cornered animal. My receptionist, a woman who could freeze lava with a glance, announced his arrival through the intercom, as if she were handling a biohazard. I told her to send him in. He shuffled into my office, a cavern of glass and steel overlooking the city, and tried to plaster on his old, charming smile. It was a ghastly fit on his tired face. "Wow, Ethan. Kid, you've done all right for yourself," he said, his gaze darting around, calculating the value of my desk, my chairs, the art on the walls. "Have a seat, Rick," I said, not getting up. I gestured to the leather armchair opposite me, a chair where CEOs had sat, where million-dollar deals were made. He sank into it, looking small and utterly out of place. "So," he began, rubbing his clammy hands together, "about the situation I mentioned." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Before we discuss any transfer of funds, I have to operate as I would with any other client seeking a high-risk, unsecured loan. I'll need to see your financials, a list of assets, liabilities, a business plan outlining your path to solvency and your strategy for repayment." He blinked, the charming facade crumbling. "Ethan, come on. It's me. This is family. I don't have all that paperwork. It's a mess right now. That's why I need the cash to sort it out." "So you have nothing," I stated, my voice flat. "No collateral, no plan, just a handout." His face flushed with anger and shame. "It's not a handout. It's a loan. I'm good for it. You know I am." I let the lie hang in the air between us, as obvious and ugly as the cheap watch on his wrist. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. I let a flicker of something. He would mistake it for compassion, cross my face. $50,000 is a lot of money to give someone who has a history of poor financial management. I paused, letting the barb sink in. "But you're right. You are family." Hope flared in his eyes. It was pathetic, but beautiful to watch. "So I had my lawyers draft a simple agreement," I said, pushing a slim, leather-bound folder across the vast expanse of my desk. "Standard terms. The interest rate is nominal, a gesture of goodwill." He snatched it like a starving man grabbing bread. He fumbled it open, his eyes scanning the first page. A relieved smile spread across his face. "Yeah, this is great, Ethan. Thank you. Really." "Turn to page 4, I said softly. "The collateral clause, a formality." His finger traced the line down the page. He stopped. His smile vanished. He read the clause again, his lips moving silently. Then a third time, his face paling, a knot of confusion and dawning horror twisting his features. The clause was simple. It stated that as security for the $50,000 loan, the borrower, Rick Vance, would agree to sign over any and all future claims, rights, and inheritance, expected or otherwise, from the estate of his father, Arthur Vance. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "What is this? This is insane. I can't sign this." "Why not?" I asked, my voice a silken weapon. "It's just a formality. Unless, of course, you believe your share of grandfather's estate is worth more than $50,000? Because if you won't bet on yourself, why should I?" He stared at me, trapped. The man who had stolen my future was now being asked to gamble with a fantasy fortune he still thought was his. He didn't know the truth, not yet, but he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that I did. The game he thought he was playing was over. Mine was just getting started. "My father's estate?" Rick stammered, his voice cracking. "Why would that be in here? He left everything to be split between us. You know that. This is some kind of sick joke." I didn't smile. I didn't move. I simply held his gaze. "A joke? No. It's a risk assessment. You're asking me for $50,000 with no assets and a proven track record of volatility. The only potential asset you might have, in some distant future, is that inheritance. I'm simply securing my position." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a confidential murmur. It's what grandfather would have done. He was a man who understood collateral. The mention of his father seemed to punch the air from his lungs. "Don't you bring him into this," he hissed, his face a mottled red. "This isn't business, Ethan. This is family. You don't treat family this way." Family? The word was a foreign object in my mouth. I let it hang there before spitting it out. "Was it family when you cashed the check for my Stanford tuition, Uncle? Was it family when you were showing off that Corvette while I was working graveyard shifts to pay for community college? Family is a contract, Rick. One you broke a long time ago. This," I tapped the leather folder, "is just a new one, with clearer terms." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. The old charm was gone, replaced by the raw desperation of a man seeing every door slam shut. That was different. I was in a jam. I was going to pay you back." "And now you're in another jam," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "And I'm offering you a way out. The only way out. Sign the document, and the $50,000 will be in your account before you leave this building. You can walk out of here and start fresh." I stood up and walked to the vast window, turning my back on him. The power move was deliberate. I stared down at the sprawling city my grandfather's legacy had allowed me to conquer. "Or you can walk out with nothing but your pride and your debts. The choice is yours. But I have a meeting in 10 minutes. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing. I didn't have to look to know he was staring at the pen on my desk. He was being asked to sell his birthright, a birthright that didn't exist, for a pittance. He was being forced to put a price on his last, desperate hope. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the glass I was looking through, that his desperation would be his signature. I heard the scrape of the pen against the paper, a harsh, scratching sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the office. He didn't look at me as he signed, his eyes fixed on the page as if it were his own death warrant. His signature, once a confident, looping flourish I'd seen on birthday cards, was now a cramped, jagged line, a monument to his defeat. He pushed the folder back across the desk with a trembling hand. "Done," he croaked, the single word costing him what little dignity he had left. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I picked up my tablet from the desk, my movements calm and deliberate. I tapped the screen a few times, my reflection staring back at me from the dark glass. "The transfer is initiated," I said, my voice level. "The $50,000 should be in your account within the minute." He immediately pulled out his phone, his thumbs fumbling with the screen. A moment later, a wave of profound, pathetic relief washed over his face. The muscles in his jaw unclenched. For the first time since he walked in, he looked me in the eye. "Thanks, Ethan," he said, the words hollow. I appreciate this. I'll pay you back. Every cent." "I know you will," I lied. I rose from my chair, the gesture a clear dismissal. The meeting was over. He got to his feet, clutching his phone like a holy relic. He looked like a man who'd just been pulled from a wreck, dazed and bleeding but technically alive. He turned to leave, his shoulders slumped, a man who had sold his name for a month's rent. He was halfway to the door when I spoke, my voice stopping him cold. "One last thing, Rick." He turned slowly, a flicker of fear back in his eyes. "What now?" "A formality," I said, picking up the signed agreement. "This document collateralizes your future inheritance. For it to be legally binding, we need to file it with the executor of grandfather's estate, Mr. Abernathy." Rick frowned, confused. "The lawyer? Why?" "It's an agreement between you and me." "Because I'm not just a person, Rick. I'm a financial institution," I said, letting the lie blend with the truth. "My company's compliance department requires that any lien on a future asset, especially one tied to an unsettled estate, be officially registered. It protects my investment. It protects the company. I let that sink in. The mention of the company made it sound impersonal, official, and non-negotiable. Unsettled? I thought that was all handled years ago, he said, the old greed flickering. The final distributions are still pending, I improvised smoothly. There are some complex holdings. Trusts within trusts. You know how he was. He nodded, buying it completely. Of course he did. He wanted to believe there was still a pot of gold waiting for him. That's what desperate men do. So what do I have to do? He asked, his voice weary. Nothing complicated. We just need to meet with Abernathy together, present the agreement. He'll stamp it, file it, and my lien on your portion of the inheritance becomes official. Simple. I looked at my watch. I've already taken the liberty of scheduling it. He can see us tomorrow morning at 10. His office. Rick hesitated. He didn't want another meeting, another humiliation. But he had my $50,000. He was already on the hook. Fine, he sighed. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. He turned and walked out of my office without another word, a ghost leaving his own haunting. I watched the door close, then walked back to the window, the signed document cool in my hand. Down below the city was a grid of lights coming to life as the sun dipped below the horizon. A city built of concrete and steel, of deals and leverage. A city my grandfather would have understood. Rick thought he'd made a deal. He thought he'd sold a hypothetical far-off inheritance for $50,000 in cash today. A smart trade for a man on the brink. He had no idea the truth was so much more brutal. He hadn't sold his inheritance. It was never his to sell. What he had actually done was purchase a ticket. For $50,000, he had bought himself a front-row seat to his own financial execution. Tomorrow, he would walk into that lawyer's office expecting a rubber stamp on a piece of paper. Instead, he would be present for the final, formal reading of his father's last will and testament. A document that had surgically, meticulously, and utterly erased him from the Vance legacy 2 decades ago. I looked at his jagged signature on the page. This wasn't just a loan agreement. It was his confession. It was proof, in his own hand, that he valued his father's legacy at a mere $50,000. It was the final piece of evidence my grandfather needed, delivered 22 years late. A cold, clean satisfaction settled over me. This was never about the money. It was about character. My grandfather had paid a cheap price to reveal Rick's. Now I was making Rick pay an exorbitant one to have it read back to him. The game wasn't over. The final move was on the board, and tomorrow it would be checkmate. Mr. Abernathy's office was a museum of time. Where my office was glass and light, his was mahogany and shadow, smelling of old paper and quiet finality. I was already seated when Rick arrived, 10 minutes late, wearing a new shirt that looked stiff and uncomfortable. The $50,000 had bought him a sliver of his old swagger back, and he walked in as if he were doing us a favor. "Abernathy," he said with a nod, ignoring me completely. "Let's get this over with. I've got a car to buy." Abernathy, a man who looked as if he'd been carved from the same granite as my grandfather, simply peered at him over his spectacles. He didn't rise. He didn't offer a greeting. He gestured to the empty chair beside me. Rick hesitated, then sat, the cheap swagger evaporating under the old lawyer's silent gaze. I slid the leather-bound agreement across the polished desk. "The document we discussed," I said. Abernathy took it, his bony fingers tracing the spine before opening it. He read the entire thing, page by page, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Rick started fidgeting, tapping his foot. "All right, is there a problem?" Rick finally snapped. "It's a simple loan agreement. Ethan's covering his bases, I get it. Just stamp the damn thing so I can get on with my life." Abernathy set the document down, perfectly squared with the edge of his desk. He looked at Rick, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was the weary patience of a man about to deliver a verdict centuries in the making. "Mr. Vance," Abernathy said, his voice a dry rustle of parchment, "this document purports to place a lien against your expected inheritance from your father's estate. Under the probate code, before I can legally witness and file such a claim, I am required to formally read into the record the specific articles of the will that pertain to the beneficiary in question. It is a non-negotiable matter of legal clarity." Rick's eyes lit up with greedy impatience. "Fine, whatever. Read the part where I get my half and let's go." Abernathy reached into a drawer and retrieved a thick, ribbon-tied vellum document. It was the will. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The blade was falling. "The last will and testament of Arthur Vance," Abernathy announced to the silent room. He untied the ribbon. "Article 4 establishes the Sterling Oak Trust. Article 5 directs that the entirety of the estate, all properties, holdings, and liquid assets, be transferred into said trust upon my death." Rick leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Okay, so the trust gets everything, and the trust is split between me and Ethan. Get to the point." Abernathy turned a page, his finger landing on a specific paragraph. Article 6, Beneficiaries. "The Sterling Oak Trust shall have one, and only one, sole beneficiary, my grandson, Ethan Vance." The words hung in the air. Rick just stared, his mouth slightly agape, the statement failing to compute. He let out a short, confused laugh. "No, that's not right. Read it again. There's a mistake. Dad would never—" "There is no mistake," Abernathy said, his voice cutting through Rick's denial. He then picked up a separate, single sheet of paper. "Your father also left a letter of instruction to be entered into the record at this time. He wished for his reasoning to be made clear." The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read my grandfather's words. "I make this decision not from a lack of fatherly affection, but from a lifetime of observation. My son, Rick, has a character that consumes. It does not build. He sees a foundation not as something to stand on, but as something to sell. The final, irrefutable proof was the theft of the $80,000 meant for my grandson's Stanford education. In that act, he didn't just steal money. He demonstrated he was willing to devour the future of his own blood for a fleeting thrill. Therefore, to ensure the Vance legacy is not consumed but cultivated, I leave it to the man who was forced to build his own foundation from nothing. My son Richard Vance is to inherit precisely what he has earned from my estate, nothing." Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Rick's face was a canvas of shock, the blood draining from it until it was the color of old ash. His eyes, wide with horror, darted from the will in Abernathy's hand to my face. And in that moment he saw it all: the phone call, the flight, the office, the loan, the contract. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an autopsy. "You," he whispered, the single word choked with venom and disbelief. "You knew. This whole thing, the loan, it was a game." I stood up, my chair making no sound on the thick rug. I looked down at the man who had stolen my future now. "A game?" I corrected him, my voice as cold and quiet as the tomb his inheritance now lay in. "No, this was a lesson. The one my grandfather taught me when he said, 'A man who builds nothing will eventually tear down everything.' You were his final, most expensive proof." I picked up the loan agreement from Abernathy's desk, the one with his desperate, jagged signature. I held it up, letting him see it. "This was never about collateral, Rick. It was about confirmation. Grandfather saw your character clearly 24 years ago. I just wanted to get it in writing." I tapped his signature on the page. "This is your official valuation. This is you, in your own hand, agreeing that your father's legacy, your entire birthright, was worth $50,000, less than you paid for that Corvette, if I recall." His face contorted, a mask of pure, impotent fury. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You bastard! That money, that 50 grand, you give it back," he roared, spittle flying from his lips. Abernathy watched him, motionless, his face a stony mask of disapproval. I didn't flinch. "Oh, you can keep the money," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Consider it a gift, a final transaction between us." I let the words hang in the air for a beat before delivering the final, killing strike. "After all, you paid for my education. It's only fair that I pay for yours." I turned my back on his shattered rage and walked towards the door, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own making. The sound of a grown man beginning to sob, a harsh, ugly sound of total defeat, followed me out into the hallway. Mr. Abernathy's office door clicked shut behind me, sealing the vault on a debt that had finally been paid in full. The lesson was complete. So I'm turning this over to you all. What should my first move be? Do I expose him right away, or do I play dumb and let him dig his own grave? I need to hear what you would do.